So a few months ago, my friend JJ McCullough made a video he titled 35 Tribes That Explain Canadian Politics. In it, he described 35 distinct kinds of people that he said you're gonna meet when dealing with politics in Canada, like the gun nut, or the French Canadian, or the healthcare fanatic. And what I thought was so interesting about his video was that he didn't really talk about ideology or political parties or anything, but just people. People with different lives, different interests that together shape our political culture. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. JJ actually asked me if I could make a version of his video, but instead about my home country of Germany. I think this will be fun, even if you don't know a lot or anything about German politics, because talking about people rather than the difficult political science mumbo-jumbo should really break it down to a basic level. So here we go, the 35 tribes that, at least according to me, define German political culture. Alright, let's start with a highly sentimentalized character in German politics, the left-behind East German. So German reunification is obviously seen as this big cheerful moment in German history, right? I mean, the fall of the Berlin Wall, families finally reunited after years apart, a peaceful end to the Cold War. But more than 30 years after the wall came down, we can now reflect more honestly that it was less of a coming together between equals and more of a botched takeover. I mean, the country of East Germany, which had existed up until 1990, crashed and fell along with its industry and normality. For a lot of Easterners, their whole world turned upside down. Tons of people lost their jobs, while Westerners came pouring in and bought everything. Just houses, the economy, everything was cheap and up for grabs. Some of the new Eastern states were even governed by Western politicians, so you can see how the West kind of just ate up the East like Pac-Man. Even East Germans themselves are severely underrepresented in German society, in politics, in the economy, even in pop culture. East Germans do indeed feel like second-rate citizens, and bridging that gap is often hard, even 30 years after reunification. Alright, these next two are about how people view German culture. When you go around asking Germans how they feel about their own country, you probably get one of two answers. The pessimist will say that German culture is just too slow, too stuffy, and so obsessed with rules that will never amount to anything ever again. These people will often point to like the United States or the Nordic countries or any other country who supposedly does it better. Whatever it is, like bureaucracy or digitization or anything else where Germany really is lacking behind. And then you have the polar opposite, which is the pro-German narcissist. A person who thinks Germany is just the greatest country on earth. In case your mind had already gone there, not in a supremacist kind of way. No, people in this category really like to view German culture through our work ethic and efficiency. That's generally how patriotism expresses itself in Germany. It's not flag waving and yelling, Deutschland, Deutschland! No, it's more saying things like, well, if the Greeks would just work as hard as we do, they wouldn't even have a financial crisis. As you can imagine, these people aren't exactly popular on the continent. I mean, who likes being mansplained to? Mansplained. The climate doomer. So environmentalism has long been a part of German politics. I mean, it's no accident that we have one of the most successful green parties in the world. The German Greens are in like 12 of our 16 state governments, I believe. So they're a big player. They're not just some minor thing as they are in many other countries. But that green movement was always primarily concerned with like clean rivers, air pollution, nuclear power, that sort of thing, when now all the attention is obviously on climate change. When I was drawing this character, I was thinking of like a young person, a person of my generation or even younger, who are really into climate activism. Like those student protests, those Greta Thunberg student protests, they were called Fridays for Future in Germany. They became really successful. They were on the news constantly. They even produced some minor celebrities like Luise Neubauer. Whether that's going to lead to actual climate policy, we'll see. But yeah, the climate doomer is definitely a big branch of German political culture at the moment. A branch that I should add has become increasingly controversial as of late, with protesters like gluing themselves on the streets and dumping oil onto paintings and all that kind of stuff. Alright, this next one is a real star character in German politics, the Bavarian Exceptionalist. So in case you don't know, Bavaria is a state in the south of Germany. It's my home state, it's the biggest one by area, second biggest by population. It's also quite wealthy, which is why the Bavarian government really likes to flex on the other parts of the country. It's also a state that really insists on being culturally unique, like for instance, Scotland in the UK or Texas in the United States. Even if you're hearing this for the very first time, there's a good chance you know quite a few things about Bavaria without even noticing it. I mean, lederhosen and dirndl, are they German or are they Bavarian? Right, they are Bavarian. What about comically big beer glasses? Bavarian again, congratulations. You won't find those in the rest of Germany. And how about giant festivals with kitschy Oompa music? Well, you'll find those in all of Germany, but if you're thinking Oktoberfest, those are in Bavaria. Now, politicians are obviously aware of that unique sense of identity, so to pander to Bavarian voters, they really lean into their Bavarianness. And it's always really obvious, they'll go, oh, nowhere else is the sky as white and blue as it is in Bavaria. They'll put down the rest of Germany as this dreary grey wasteland with no humor, but Bavaria, of course, is this paradise, this golden island in the middle of it all. This also means that they're the most visually distinct group in German politics. Like, the men will often wear a janker instead of a suit and tie, notice the collar, and women will wear their dirndl dresses, of course. This can make Bavarian politicians seem a little exotic and alien to the rest of the country, and there's a lot of tensions between those weird mountain-dwelling Bavarians and the quote-unquote normal Germans. And even politically, Bavaria is kind of this oddball character. Like, the premier of Bavaria, the leader of the state of Bavaria, always has this elevated position within German politics. Because the Bavarian premier, who's almost always guaranteed to be a conservative, is expected to be a champion of rising up against the green left establishment of Berlin. Like, that's one of the main narratives on the right, that Bavaria is kind of this safe space for conservative rationality. And no, I know that the internet loves to speculate that Bavaria will become independent any day now, but it's not gonna happen. It's an idea you'll have after a couple of these, but nobody is seriously thinking about it. Sorry Germans, we're not leaving. Moving on to someone who's also very prominent in Bavaria, the social Christians. What can I say? Germany is a predominantly Christian society, so it only follows that some people derive some of their political agency from their beliefs. Only about half of the German public identifies as Christian these days, and most of them are non-practicing. If you're not part of the religious set, you might not really hear from the social Christians all that much, but they are still intertwined with politics quite a bit. The church played a big role in the unification of East and West Germany. There are schools and hospitals run by the churches collect taxes, and heck, there's even a Christian Democratic Union that's like our biggest conservative party. So there is a constant Christian undertone to German politics, even if it may be subtle at times. But I don't think we should assume that social Christians are only active in the Christian Democratic Party. They're not necessarily as conservative as you may think. Faith can express itself in many different ways, so there are social Christians of many different political sways. The Russia understander. When it comes to foreign relations, Germany has a couple other countries that regularly come up in conversation. For instance, France as the biggest partner within the EU, a lot of cultural exchange happening there. Israel, for obvious historical reasons, the horrors of the Holocaust still looming over the relationship. The United States as the biggest military and an important economic partner. And then there's Russia, which is a bit difficult. The general perception of the Russian government is of course that of a foul player, an opponent on the international stage. However, there are some, the so-called Russlandversteher, who are much softer on the Kremlin. A quick history lesson. So some of this affinity goes back to Willy Brandt, a revered and iconic chancellor of West Germany from the early 1970s. One of Brandt's main accomplishments was Die Neue Ostpolitik, the new Eastern policy that sought to, soften relationships with the Eastern Bloc, open up relationships with East Germany so families could visit more easily. He even got a Nobel Peace Prize for it. And that's still viewed as one of the success stories of post-war Germany, de-escalating the Cold War, kind of cooling things down. Now, a lot of people who see themselves as Willy Brandt's ideological successors still cling to this idea that amicable relations with Russia are essential for a prosperous and peaceful Europe. Now, this behavior does not go unnoticed by the Kremlin. There is a well-established pipeline that goes directly from German politics to a job in the Russian economy. Former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder may be the best example for this. He went straight from leading Germany to Rosneft, a Russian state-owned oil and gas company. Now, I'm filming this in what's the second year of Russia's unprovoked war against Ukraine. Consequently, the influence of the Russia understanders has decreased significantly. And I wonder if they'll even make it as a tribe into like the next couple of decades, or whether this tribe will die out soonish. Okay, moving on to the center.
Oh.
So the center, or die Mitte, is probably one of the most overused terms in German political debates. So we get Chancellor of the Center, we are the center, 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 center. Every political actor always craves the approval of the center. But who even is that? It's never explicitly defined. Is it economic, as in middle class? Is it philosophical, as in non-extremist, middle-of-the-road, chill people? It's never actually stated, because everybody is kind of supposed to be part of the center. Whether you're rich or poor or right or left, it doesn't matter. Everybody is supposed to be part of the center. So is the term just useless? Well, I wouldn't say so. I mean, this obsession with the center can come off as a bit ridiculous, but it has a purpose. It kind of gives German politics this goal of pulling everybody else into a sensible middle, because we're all supposed to be part of the center. The center needs to be upheld. Now, does that actually work? Well, in reality, the center often just happens to align with whatever a politician believes. I am speaking for the center and you are not. No, I am speaking for the center and you are not, and so on. Next up, the Erdoğanist, Putinist, Orbánist set. I think we can make this one quick. There are people who enjoy the many freedoms that a democratic and free country like Germany offers, while still fangirling over strongman leaders from other countries. Now, let me just say that I do not want to equate these three. Like, these are three different leaders from three different countries. But what's remarkable is their fans are pretty similar. People who yearn for a flavor of politician that's really unabashed and strong and manly, that's just not very common or admired in German politics these days. These people do not have to have ties to these countries, by the way. They don't have to have family in Turkey or Hungary or Russia to think this way. Politicians are generally quite worried about this and try to reel them back into German liberal society, back into the center. The Union Man. So the German labor force is pretty well organized, in large parts thanks to a long tradition of broadly effective workers' unions. Of course, a good union man would immediately disagree with that premise and go, no, German workers are not represented enough. And fair enough, that's their job. But, by international standards, Germany has a pretty well organized workforce. We have all these concepts like co-determination and elected workers' councils, so depending on your line of work, you can have some influence over just how your company operates. And again, to protect these interests, we have a pretty noticeable presence of workers' unions. I deliberately say noticeable because you will notice their strikes and demonstrations. Say if trains are cancelled because the union of train drivers is on strike to demand higher wages. Same for the union of metal workers or the police or healthcare personnel. They all regularly make the news. And the people that I've met that are very active in unions are very passionate about their line of work, like very protective about their line of work, which is really in character for the union man or union woman. I just didn't draw a woman. The Eastalgic. So Eastalgic is a person who's very nostalgic for the old communist East. You get it? Eastalgic. In a way, this can be quite benevolent. Like, some people just love to collect artifacts from that era. Consumer goods, toys, brands, just cute knickknacks like that. But there's also a much darker version of it, something that I, as a filthy Westerner, obviously have no clue about. So I decided to call up my friend Anna, who's actually from the East, to tell us what's the deal with Eastalgics. Here's what she said.
For Eastalgics, the most important sentence is, not everything was bad. They say it 1,000 times, I've heard it 1,000 times, it's such a cliché. On the one hand, you've got the people whose standard of living dropped significantly after reunification. These Wendeverlierer, losers from the turn, often look back on the GDR with glorified nostalgia. Then there's the sentiment of, we still had a sense of togetherness back then, and everybody used to be the same. In the GDR, nobody fell out of the system. They are disappointed with current politics and they feel forgotten. In most cases, the regions are not doing well economically either. That definitely reinforces the political extremism around here.
Okay, so as we discussed already, Easterners feeling left behind. I then asked her if there are any specific policies that people miss from communist times, to which she replied,
in my experience, people will often bring up the unitary system of education, compulsory military or social service, community youth organizations, steady employment, and clear top-down organizations.
I think that's really important to note because it's often overlooked how no matter how cruel or wicked a regime was, there always remains a lingering sense of nostalgia for at least aspects for it. People from the East often say, like, we had normal childhoods, we went on vacation, it wasn't all dictatorship all the time. People lived lives and some people forget that. The last thing she mentioned, I think, was particularly striking. It goes,
do you remember the terrorist attacks on Paris a few years ago? After those were reported in the press, people moaned that such a thing wouldn't have gone public back then. Stories like this would have been suppressed. And they really believed that was a good thing? You'd think that after being stuck in a regime that sought to manipulate its citizens with state-controlled media, they'd be happy about the freedom of press we enjoy nowadays. But no, rather than hearing the truth, they just don't want to be worried. Freedom of press isn't valued around here at all. It's seen as a liability.
Pretty hard stuff. The Eastalgics, people who are nostalgic for parts of the old communist dictatorship. The rich. Another quick one, rich people exist and some of them only interact with politics to protect their own wealth, to protect their wealth from taxes, from the greedy hands of the government. Now that's not morally wrong, we all want to protect our money in some way, but there does exist a certain tribe of person who's so preoccupied with their own money, their own personal wealth and keeping regulations low so they can enrich themselves even further. And with that money obviously comes above average influence. I purposefully didn't include the other end of the spectrum, the properly poor people, because they often don't play a role in political culture. Money can buy you influence, money can buy time and resources to put into your own political views. The politically rich, revered by some, despised by others, definitely their own subculture. And speaking of distinct subcultures, the conspiracy theorist. Yeah, Germany also doesn't have a shortage of their own homegrown tinfoil hats. Thank you, the internet. And it's often surprising just how widespread these theories can be. Like, even quote-unquote normal people will often spurt out stuff that's just absolutely ludicrous. You all know them, you are aware of the conspirazoids in your own country, so I don't want to dwell on them all that much, but I do want to introduce you to the most infamous group of conspiracy theorists in Germany, die Reichsbürger, the citizens of the empire, who believe, and get this, Germany is not a real country. That's right, folks, the Federal Republic of Germany does not exist. It was set up illegally by foreign powers on our land, and we demand that Poland give back Silesia. Now bring me pictures of Spider-Man! Yes, these people genuinely believe that the German Empire is still going somehow. Which can be a real pain in the ass for law enforcement because They obviously don't respect the laws or police of a state that shouldn't exist. And a few months ago, the German police actually raided some of the Reichsbürger homes and found a huge stockpile of weapons that they wanted to use to overthrow the current German government and install some guy as the new emperor of Germany or whatever. It's ludicrous stuff. It's amazing. So yeah, this is not a country, it's a company, and we're not citizens, we're technically employees. Alright, back to the real world with the EU-Megafan.
Yeah! Oh yeah!
You know how in a lot of European countries it's pretty popular to blame everything on the European Union? We also have that, but generally speaking, Germans are pretty on board with our little club. And that only makes sense. I mean, both geographically and economically, Germany is kind of at the heart of the European Union. But some people aren't just into the EU, they are into the EU. For them, the European Union isn't just some trading bloc, but the future of Europe, something akin to the Federation in Star Trek, a beacon of democracy. This can take on different forms, but generally this person just loves cooperation between countries, right? So a common foreign policy, a united European army, just beefing up Europe so it becomes some kind of super country. The interesting thing is, none of it is really bound up in ideology. It doesn't matter if you're right or left or liberal or green or socialist or whatever. There are European megafans of all party colors and denominations. And why are they so into the EU? Well, I don't want to become all psychoanalytical here, but I do think a lot of it stems from a kind of insecurity about Europe's place in the modern world. More specifically, I think a lot of Europeans fear that we could once again be at the mercy of other superpowers like the US or China. So these megafans perceive it as their mission to bring the continent eye to eye with these global superpowers, while feeling very enlightened about supposedly transcending nationalism. Next is the social justice warrior. I don't think I have to explain this one all that much either. It's the kind of person who focuses on the politics of race and gender and minority rights in general. They're usually very left-wing, very urban, very concerned with how we use language these days. Basically the nightmare fuel for any German conservative. What always strikes me as special about them is how they almost feel like the most Americanized subgroup in German politics. You know, a lot of those discussions and concepts on race and gender identity are often imported from the US and are then translated into the German context, like Germany is always second in that process. Oh, and by the way, be careful how you translate the term social justice, because it has a slightly different meaning in German. Like, what do you think of when I say the English social justice? You think about the politics of race and gender and minority rights, correct? But then the literal German translation, soziale Gerechtigkeit, is primarily concerned with financial inequality, the financial inequalities between rich and poor. So for instance, our union man from before, he could be labeled as caring about social justice in the German sense, because he wants more money to be transferred to a certain set of people. Just once again proves that words can have different meanings depending on language and culture. Moving right on with the anger citizen. Do you want to guess what these guys are motivated by? That's right, anger and frustration. It's a pretty common expression, anger citizen or Wutbürger in German. So common in fact that I was really surprised to learn that it was only popularized in 2010 in an article of the Spiegel magazine. Since then it's kind of evolved into this catch-all term to describe almost any rage-fueled person who engages in politics. It's the kind of people who are aggressively anti-government, who will scream at politicians and march the streets with next to no discernible agenda other than a big vulgar F you. Just people who feel extremely unrepresented by our politicians or indeed the entire system. Now the interesting thing is that until recently there was no real effort to catch them. What do I mean by that? Well, whenever there's a strong emotion in the public, be it anger or sadness or happiness or pride, politicians will usually jump right on that. It's like they're itching to cash in on all that emotion, to go I hear you people and I feel just the same. But in Germany, that's not really the case. Sure, the AfD does mingle with the younger citizens quite a bit. That's the far-right populist party, which is why we think of the younger citizens as a mostly right-wing phenomenon. But the other parties don't. The other parties don't court the Wutbürgerset. Quite the opposite, actually. These people are seen as a nuisance, a group that doesn't interact in good faith, so why come close? Why legitimize their temper tantrums by visiting their rallies, for example? Do you think that's a good idea? I've heard convincing arguments either way. Okay, so far we've been talking about a lot of rather eccentric tribes, so let's dial it back a little. How would Germans categorize the quote-unquote normal electorate? Well, one key divider is obviously between rural and urban voters. Hardly surprising, right? This might just be the most common way to divide countries across the world, with rural voters usually being understood as much more conservative than their urban, progressive counterparts. This is also true in Germany, to an extent, where the parties of the left, and especially the Greens, are particularly successful in urban centers, while the Christian Democrats are far more established in rural parts of the country. But we shouldn't overestimate that divide. One, because it's not the only divider. There's also a Catholic-Protestant border, there's East and West of course, there's the ever-present North-South debate, so the whole city versus village thing is really just one factor among many. And two, Germany doesn't actually have a lot of very big cities. There's only 4 that sport more than 1 million inhabitants. That's Berlin, Hamburg, München and Köln. But beyond those, we're a country of many mid-sized towns and villages, so it's less of a sharp divide and more of a gradual transition. Same with politics. It's not like conservatives can't win in big cities, it's just that the parties will need to adjust their messaging to the unique sensibilities of either group. For instance, public transport versus cars, crowded subways versus empty town squares, or multiculturalism versus a more homogeneous culture. Where you live is an important part of who you are, and who we are informs our needs in life. Another divide we can look at is between the young and old vote. In many countries, this is another purely ideological divide. You know, the young voting more progressive, while the old have grown more conservative over time. But that's not strictly the case over here. The far more important difference is old people vote for big parties, while young people vote for smaller parties. Weird, right? Why is that? Well, as I mentioned in my previous award-winning video, we used to have a 2-party system until quite recently. There were only 2 big camps of voters. If you were a devout Catholic from the south, you would vote for the Conservatives. And if you were a working class guy from the north who doesn't really care for religion, you would vote for Labour. That's how it was. Loyal, reliable voters, essentially everyone in the country would slot into one of those 2 halves. Now, the older you are, the more that's still ingrained into your brain. Older folks will reliably vote for either the CDU or the SPD, which were the big right and left-wing parties ever since the ending of World War II. But young people don't share that loyalty anymore. They don't differentiate between big and small parties. Here, I can show you how they voted in the last election. With people over 70, it still looks like our old 2-party system, right? 2 big parties of the right and left, and then the rest. But with people under 25, far from it. So we get this really interesting situation where the party system is constantly in flux. If present trends continue, we might be headed into a much less stable future, one where new parties can pop up every now and then, and the older ones are constantly under threat of going extinct at the next election. Those are some pretty high stakes. We'll see how it all shakes out, but I think it's a fascinating development. Migration background. Now in the Canada video, JJ talked about the so-called ethnic vote, people from ethnic or religious minority backgrounds who have become an increasingly important voting bloc in Canadian politics. Let's take a quick look at his segment.
There has been sort of a rise of a new class of Canadian politician who build their reputation on the pretense that they're very good at sort of wrangling the ethnic vote in this way. You know, this entails things like going to their churches and temples and stuff, and going to their, holiday festivals and things. The political parties now also run a lot of immigrants as candidates these days, which has led to the rise of a similar sort of political figure who is very much sort of seen as being of a particular ethnic demographic, and can thus, presumably kind of wrangle their votes as one of them.
Ever since I saw that part of the video, I've been thinking about it. Politicians who act for or of a certain minority group, and I don't think we have that over here. Or at least it's just starting now, and that's surprising. It's a surprise because Germany has sported a large intake of immigrants for a long time now. Take the so-called guest workers, for instance, whose families came in the 60s and 70s. So why isn't there what JJ described? Why is it that during election campaigns we don't ever hear about the Turkish vote, for instance, like you do with the Latino vote in the United States? Well, I don't know, I can only speculate. But one factor might be that a lot of people with migration background aren't actually citizens yet. Contrary to what you might have heard, German citizenship is not actually that easy to acquire. So a lot of people might just not play a role in elections because they can't vote. But maybe there's also a cultural reason for it. Unlike, say, Brazil or the United States or Canada, Germany has more, let's call it old world sensibilities. A lot of German people are simply not used to this idea of the melting pot or the salad bowl, where people get to bring their own cultural influences and add them to the mix. I mean, we already talked about the center. There's a huge expectation in German society to assimilate in order to participate. All that is not to say that we do not have examples for what JJ was talking about. As I said, I think we're starting to see that develop right now. Cem Özdemir might be a good example. He sometimes plays into his parents' Turkishness, albeit always in balance with his heavy Swabian German identity. Or Aminata Touré, who's often quite vocal about being a black woman in Germany. I suppose we'll see more of that going forward, a sort of embrace of the ethnic minority background in German politics. Oh, next are the uninterested. This is quite frustrating for a lot of political nerds to realize, but yes, large parts of the public couldn't care less about politics. A lot of people just don't follow the news all that closely. They don't care about the topic of the day or the latest hashtag to ignite social media. That doesn't mean that they never participate, of course. German elections usually have a pretty high voter turnout, so even the most uninterested fellas will at least turn up and cast their vote. Of course, not that much thought has gone into it. A lot of people will simply use the Valomat app. It's this test where you answer a couple of questions and ta-da, the machine will tell you which party is closest to what you believe. Now, isn't that just nice? In case you can't tell, I am deeply skeptical of that thing. I do not think it's a good tool for what people actually use it for. But yeah, the uninterested. Also part of the culture. Magdeburger Gartenpartei? Okay. Auto über alles. Saying that Germans love their cars is an understatement. This is car country. The first car was allegedly invented here, and with companies like BMW, Mercedes, Audi, Porsche, the country also runs on the automotive industry. Millions of people either directly or indirectly work in that sector, so car manufacturers hold a lot of sway over German politics, although they are increasingly challenged by the climate change crowd. Go electric! This obsession with cars also leads to one of our most beloved discussions, the speed limit debate. In case you don't know, German highways do not have a speed limit for large stretches of the road. You can go as fast as you'd like, 180, 200 kilometers per hour, no problem. Some people absolutely love this, others really take issue with it. It's one of the most heated debates Germans will have around their dinner tables. Now you gotta understand just how emotional this debate is. For most car fans, the idea of a speed limit is highly offensive. Their ability to drive as fast as humanly possible is bound up in real pride. They see it as a reason for why we make such exceptionally good cars. Driving fast equals cars, and cars equal Germany, so don't you dare touch that, or the country is going right down the drain. Or driving off a cliff, shit, that would have been better. And now the pacifist. Yes, pacifism has become a big part of the German identity after World War II, which can obviously be attributed to the horrific experiences of the wars and the shame of Nazi imperialism. And on top of that, the Cold War. Germany was literally split in two, always in danger, or at least believed to be in danger, of becoming an active war zone. If a nuclear bomb is dropped, surely it'll be dropped right on our heads, is what people used to think. So some Germans turned to pacifism, to promoting disarmament, out of fear. Another reason might be that, well, our military wasn't really necessary at that time, was it? Our German militaries existed, of course, but de facto security was not handled by German forces alone. It lay in the hands of the superpowered patron on either side, namely the US and the Soviet Union. So Germans could, in a way, lean back, knowing that we keep our hands clean, we don't go to war anymore, evil empires are doing the fighting. Of course, Germany did always supply weapons to international buyers, and German forces did participate in active war zones again starting in the 1990s. But the image of "we don't do war" is still prevalent in a lot of people's minds. It's a wish they all share, which in turn has made it very difficult for German politicians to even touch military affairs without being branded as overly militaristic. Haven't we heard enough? So over the last couple of decades, Germany has developed a very sturdy culture of remembrance. Acknowledging and talking about the Nazi crimes is one of the most reliable rituals in political life, starting with all sorts of memorial days like January 27th, the liberation of the Auschwitz concentration camp, or November 9th, the Night of Broken Glass. Politicians are expected to give speeches, visit monuments, pay some form of tribute to the victims of the Holocaust. TV is full of Nazi documentaries, school classes get to visit former concentration camps, we have the names of Holocaust victims etched onto brass plates on our streets, it's really everywhere. Now, many Germans are quite happy about this culture of remembrance, they see it as a strength of modern Germany, but there does exist a vocal part of the country who's really fed up with it all. I call them the "haven't we heard enough" tribe because that's basically the sentiment. It's been over 70 years, people, let's move on. This is not humility, it's a humiliation. Yeah, that's a difficult opinion. If you say stuff like that, you're kind of peak contrarian because you're going up against the very soul of modern Germany, or at least the image that we've curated of that soul in the last couple of decades. It's also difficult because this tribe is often dangerously close to people who want to outright rehabilitate parts of our shady past. You know, with lines like, "We need to be proud of the Wehrmacht soldier again. If anything, your forefathers were heroes. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Yeah, I gotta admit I have a deep disdain for this view. Sorry for not being neutral here. These people just can't seem to reconcile the evils of the past with their own need for patriotism, which I think is kind of childish. At the same time, I gotta admit, it has to be possible to be critical of the way Germany is dealing with its past. Like, we're not perfect, and we need to improve and adapt to changing times. Der Mittelstand. Every country in the world is so proud of their small and medium-sized companies, right? It's always, oh, the small and medium-sized companies, they're the backbone of our economy. And that's true in Germany as well. We even have a special German word to describe these small and medium-sized companies, Mittelstand. And we cannot overstate just how sentimentalized the Mittelstand phenomenon actually is. This is all very theoretical, so let me give you an example. If you're asking somebody from a mittelständische company what they're doing, they're usually answering like: Unsere Produkte finden Sie in praktisch jeder technischen Anwendung weltweit und das, obwohl wir nur 20 Mitarbeiter haben und wir produzieren am Arsch der Welt. Das ist echte Markenqualität. Made in Germany. Superklasse, Leute. I'm exaggerating, of course, but you get it, right? They are small, but they can be internationally relevant, at least some of them. That's also why international observers are often fascinated by the Mittelstand phenomenon. But it's hard to replicate because they're not just small companies, there's also a cultural component to it. You see, Mittelstand companies are usually family-owned and have been for generations. So you get this high degree of loyalty, not just by the owners, but also by the employees, making the entire thing quite familial. In a way, the Mittelstand is supposed to be the economic equivalent of the middle class. Not bourgeois oppressor and unhappy workers, but the middle working with intention. Or at least that's the myth. Okay, from dry economic theory onto something a bit more spicy. The Esoterics. Bit of a weird one, I agree. Being esoteric doesn't strike me as particularly political in nature, right? But esoterics do have a real presence in German politics. See, for a country that's supposedly as science-driven and mechanical as Germany, we do have widespread beliefs in all sorts of alternative medicine, a lot of which lacks any basis in science. I'm talking magic healing stones in your water or cork carpets to protect you against the dangerous earth rays. Or my favorite scam of them all, homeopathy. Now, esoterics are not a full-fledged movement or anything, but you can see their influence on healthcare or child rearing, for instance. And if you're working for a politician, you can be sure to encounter esoterics on a daily basis. Not saying any of this is inherently bad, by the way. Their ideas range from outright wacky to interesting and different. Esoterics used to make up a significant portion, or at least a stereotypical part, of the Green Party's base, but ever since the Green Party has tried to go professional, you hear less and less about them. They're the more emotional, feeling part of political culture in Germany. No, we can't forget the next one, it's the community politician.
Ho, ho, ho.
People sometimes dismiss the lower levels of politics as somehow less important than the national ones, but no, they're a vital part of our day-to-day lives. Local politicians are such dedicated souls, I'd feel bad if we didn't at least mention them. I think it's admirable when you commit your life to the good of the community. They're the best networkers among all the tribes, they have the best connection to regular citizens, they gotta eat at a lot of buffets. And while our political parties are basically the same in every level of government, ideology doesn't really matter when trying to build a bridge or a new playground. And I think that's beautiful. Extremists. Alright, let's not sugarcoat anything. Germany does have a problem with political extremism. Not more so than many other European countries, but they are still part of our political culture. With the far right, as in neo-Nazis, usually considered as the biggest threat at the moment. Whenever I bring up this topic, there's usually one person who's like, "What? Neo-Nazis in Germany? I thought those were illegal." Like, yes, of course they are, but they still exist. Is that a common myth, that Germany is somehow so moderate that we don't have any violent extremists? Because, no, that's not true. We do have them, sadly. The grey mouse. In a way, grey mouse is the equivalent to the English wallflower. You know, a person who's kind of shy and quiet and doesn't want to make an impression one way or the other. And that's how I describe a certain kind of political actor here in Germany, a politician who's so successful strictly because they're so boring and inconspicuous. Former Chancellor Angela Merkel was a prime example for this. Her acting all non-ideological and pragmatic and grey was her entire brand and a reason why people liked her so much. Especially during the Trump and Brexit years, my British and American friends were all like, "Oh, mustn't it be nice to have boring leaders?" And yeah, sure, it was. But let's also look at the downsides of having a leader like that. Under Merkel, Germany was actually in the bizarre situation where people wished for more polarization. Like, many people in the political sphere were actually yearning for more division to break the deafening silence. You see, if everything is supposedly pragmatic, there's no need for discussion. That's maybe where our obsession with the center ends. People want to debate, they want to fight it out, that's what democracy is for. But boring leaders are successful. Some people want to attribute that to the Nazi experience, you know, because the Nazis were quite charismatic leaders, so this seems like the overcorrection. And sure, you can trace everything in German politics back to the Nazis, but I think the reason is much blander. German culture simply doesn't value showmanship nearly as much as most other countries do. Like, I don't think a Trump or even an Obama would fly here. Being too charismatic in Germany suggests that you're hiding something.
Oh, he's charming.
Yeah, great public speaker.
Yeah. I don't trust him.
Me neither. The ancient elite. By ancient elite, I'm referring to the old aristocracy, you know, princes, dukes, countesses, merchant families, the former blue-blooded houses that used to rule these fair lands. The monarchy has been abolished for over 100 years now, and Germany has turned into a solidly republican society. I mean, we have loads of gorgeous castles and palaces, but our politicians only get to sit in grey concrete offices. As they well should. But of course, descendants of the royal families are still running around. Especially in the realm of politics, you still encounter the occasional von and zu so-and-so. Those are former royal titles that have now been demoted into regular surnames. Now, is that important? No, the former monarchy does not play a significant role in society whatsoever. And yet, every person that I talked to before making this video wanted me to include them. I guess I can see why. There's something inherently political about them, or at least some people will treat them as if there was. Some former royals kind of still play pretend, you know, as if monarchy was still around, with the titles and the fancy weddings, family above everything, darling. Just goes to show that power structures can stick around for a long time, even centuries after they've been formally abolished. The ÖRR Enthusiast. So a big part of politics is theater. Sure, it's mainly boardroom meetings about rules and trade regulation, but it's also theater. And the glamorous stage for any political actor is your TV screen. Even in this digital day and age, television still dominates our understanding of politics. It's where politicians try to one-up each other and try to promote their own agenda. And for the people I'm describing here, that's their obsession, the media circus of politics. Now, why did I dub them the ÖRR Enthusiast? Well, this weird abbreviation with the umlaut in it stands for Öffentlich-Rechtlicher Rundfunk, a collective term to describe all of the public broadcasters in Germany. You know what those are, right? The BBC in Britain, the CBC in Canada, the ORF in Austria, non-profit media outlets funded by the citizens. I could have also mentioned traditional newspapers or tabloids. Those are also really important for political discussion, but the public broadcasters really take the crown. They're by far the most popular stage where most Germans will consume information about national politics, unlike in other countries where the private broadcasters are much more successful. Especially the Tagesschau, which is the main evening news program on Channel 1, is set to form the nation's agenda. No other news show, be it public or private, can even compete. The Tagesschau is so dominant, in fact, that primetime movies on German television start at the odd time of 8:15 p.m. because that's when the Tagesschau ends and you don't want to compete with their time slot. There's a lot for the ÖRR enthusiasts to either love or hate about the program, especially panel discussions and satire shows. It's the stage where politicians will try to fight it out, and there's a lot of people who are into the drama.
Oh my god, did you see what Friedrich Merz said on Markus Lanz?
No. Do I have to? Number 33, the Transatlantic.
How can I help?
I guess this is kind of the Western equivalent to the Russia understander, a person who's very appreciative of NATO and the United States and our Western alliances more broadly. They also make support of Israel a core part of their identity. I gotta be honest though, I almost forgot to put them in, which would have been a big oversight on my part. The reason I almost forgot to put them in is because, Well, these opinions are very ubiquitous in German society. Being differential to the Western Alliance is kind of a given, it's part of the mainstream. Like, sure, the United States is often frowned upon in this stereotypically European way, like, oh, look at those Amis over there, hey, get some healthcare, won't ya? But in general, this kind of person is far less challenged than, say, the Russia understander. In a lot of ways, the Transatlantics are thus a kind of outgrowth of post-war West Germany in particular. You know, they would say that Germans in particular should be very grateful to the Americans because it was their aid, their concepts of freedom and democracy that got us out of the ruins of Nazism. Modern Germany was shaped a lot in the image of the United States, and the Transatlantics would argue that we should stay on that path. Alright, we're almost done, let's quickly get through the data protector. Pretty self-explanatory, right? The internet has made the protection of your data a more front-of-mind issue. Gosh, this would be the perfect spot for a VPN ad, but not sponsored. No, data protection is big in Germany. Germans are like the last people to use paper money, because that way nobody can trace where I buy my pretzels. Add to that the experience with surveillance during the East German dictatorship, or more recently by the NSA, when it was revealed that our friends the Americans were actually spying on German citizens, including the Chancellor's phone. That did not sit well with a lot of people. For some, this obsession with privacy is good. Data protection is important. Others say that it's a hurdle and a big reason why bureaucracy is so bad over here. The party soldier. The last tribe, hallelujah! So the whole intention behind this video was for me to describe politics not through the lens of political parties, but kind of one step below that. How does the regular, normal person interact with politics? But of course, political parties are also made up by normal people. If I've done my math right, about 1.6% of Germans are members of political parties. That may not sound like a lot, and it really isn't, but parties in Germany aren't just these clubs that you join on a whim. They tend to be quite time-consuming activities. Active members will have to attend all sorts of meetings and discussions and campaigns, and they have to print posters and hand out pens. It's tedious work. But I suppose it's a small price to pay. After all, if you're a member of a political party, you're one of the most powerful citizens of the country. If you want to become a political big shot in Germany, you gotta play the game. You gotta join a party, climb those ranks. You can't just go and run for office. You need this small set of people to become their candidate. And what about the name that I gave this tribe? Party soldier. Well, party soldier is a derogatory nickname that we use to describe these members and their dogged loyalty. They're some of the only people in German politics to only support that one party. Your typical German doesn't really do that. It's perfectly normal over here to go, well, I don't know who I'm gonna vote for, but I have 2 or 3 preferences. Only the party soldier will stridently display their allegiance and go, yes, I am team red, or team yellow, or team blue, or whatever. Well, I say stridently display, but even they are pretty chill. Nobody in Germany is bringing out bumper stickers or rosettes or flags or anything. It's really chill politics. Wait. Those were 35. I counted. Aren't we done? Well, almost. Obviously, there were many more tribes that I could have mentioned. Even a long list of 35 can only give you a glimpse of what German politics is all about. So I want to ask you, YouTube doesn't have to be a one-way stream, let's have a conversation. If you're from Germany, please do let us know who else I could have included in this list. You can tag your comment with tribe36 so we can find it easier. That way people will know how far into the video you actually got. And if you're not from here, please tell us what surprised you the most. I'm genuinely curious. Either way, I hope you learned something about my country. I hope you had fun along the way. And now for some final thoughts. JJ, I loved making this video. This tribe idea of yours is so great at breaking down a complicated cacophony into bite-sized little stories. if you haven't watched JJ's original video yet, I highly recommend that you do. And also check out Genetically Modified Skeptics video. Drew also made a video in this format, but his wasn't concerned with politics at all. Instead, he made a video showing us the 8 different types of atheists that exist in America, which I thought was so interesting because I didn't know anything about the topic at all. Okay, nothing left to say other than the normal mumbo-jumbo, leave a like, comment, subscribe, whatever, but especially share the video, please. I know it's a niche, nerdy little topic, so if you have a friend or a partner or a Discord server who might enjoy this type of video, then please share it with them. That would really help me out. And the moral of the entire video, I guess, is that there's so many flavors of being human. Like, I made 35 tribes, but you really can't capture human experience in just a couple of Pokemon categories. So yeah, goodbye, good night, love yourself, and see you around.